so that moves us to 10, the approval of the minutes of the April 24th, 2023 board meeting. Do I have a motion, Mr. Hogan?
I'd like to make the motion that the board approves the minutes of the April 24th, 2023 board meeting.
Do you have a second, Ms. Huddle? Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? That motion passes 7-0, and that moves us to 11, public participation. Do we have public participation?
Yes, ma'am. We have one participant.
All right.
Dina Burley is here to speak about Teacher Appreciation Week.
All right, and as Ms. Burley approaches, I would just like to say the board welcomes and encourages public participation. We respectfully ask that you adhere to the procedures provided in Board Policy BEDH, public participation at meetings. Your comments should be limited to 3 minutes and must remain on either the topic noted on your sign-in form or a listed agenda item. Questions asked during public participation will be handled in accordance with Board Policy BEDH. Ms. Burley.
Take a minute, is this on? Okay. During this Teacher Appreciation Week, to put a spotlight on a few teachers that are the epitome to our district's mission, and that is loving and growing our students. So my kids both attend Harbison West, the SCLRS program, and I have loved all of our teachers throughout this program. But the two that I want to talk about tonight are my daughter's 5th grade teachers. I received an email of late Thursday night, like a couple months ago, that left me in tears. And I want to take a moment and read it to you guys. It says, I realize that I am sending this email late on a Thursday evening, but I've been sitting here reflecting about your wonderful child. She is such a shining example of what we all hope for your young people. Giving, respectful, kind, but also curious, creative, honest, and fun. She seems to always know how others are feeling and is able to think from multiple perspectives. I'm sure so much of it is the love that you put into raising her, but also a great deal of who she is just inside. She has chosen her path early, and it's wonderful to see. I know that things are not always easy or straightforward for her, which makes her strengths even more powerful. That was from Ms. Phelps. And I don't want to leave Ms. Funk out, because Ms. Funk actually just last week submitted a behavioral referral for her, a positive one, not a negative one, to show that how she is, my daughter, supporting the learning for the entire class. And so I just love the fact that these teachers are taking the time to recognize these wonderful things in our students. But not just they're recognizing it, they're also helping them recognize it. And so having my daughter hear these words about being spoken about her and about what she's bringing to the table is a game changer. And so I wanted to also mention that these teachers, obviously this is just a sample, but this is happening all across our district. It's one of the reasons why I've gotten involved in my local schools. So I am part of the PTO and the SIC, and I'm doing work with the District 5 Foundation. And so anything that I can do to help support them means I am making a difference for our students too. In fact, this month I actually submitted one of the 5 for 5s for the District 5 Foundation, which is going towards its snack pack program. It's going towards teacher and student grants. And so that's one way that you can help celebrate a teacher this month. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And just know that great work is being done in our district.
All right, thank you for that. That moves us to our action agenda. So action as necessary or appropriate on matters discussed in executive session. Do I have any motions? Mr. Hogan. Employment items.
I'd like to make the motion that the board approve selected employment items shown in Exhibit A.
A second? Do I have a second? Ms. Huddle? Any discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? That is 7-0. Motion carries. Do I have any more motions? Mr. Scully.
Yeah, I move that we approve the sale of the land parcel at the intersection of Emory Lane and St. Andrews Road to the SCDOT for signal improvements at the proposed price of $3,100.
Do I have a second? Mr. Hogan. Do I have any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? That motion carries 7-0. Any more motions? Mr. Scully.
I move that we exercise the 30-day notice option on JAG auditing services.
Do I have a second? Mr. Satterfield. And is there any discussion? Mr. Scully?
Yeah, just briefly, I believe that by making this motion, I believe it's time for us to move on and turn the page as a district on our auditing contractor. I think it's very important for us to give our CFO, Ms. Paul, and the administration a fresh start with a chance to work with an auditing firm that they can have full confidence in, that she believes in and she can have a good working relationship with. So if there were no other reasons, that alone would be enough, because I think she deserves that opportunity to work with a firm that she can feel confident working with and fully trust. But there are other reasons. Another one that also stands on its own, in my opinion, is simply that, and for no fault of anybody outside of the participants included, our JAG is listed as a co-defendant in a lawsuit that the district is involved in. And to me, that's a game changer. The reason for that, and it inevitably moves us to this point, whether we like it or not, because they are potentially...
Mr. Scully, I'm just going to caution you just to make sure to be careful when we talk about legal matters. Just
Oh, yeah.
we're dancing a line, so I'm just...
Yep. But that's public information.
Mm-hmm.
But they could be potentially... she could have potentially adverse interests with the district. We're not partners in the lawsuit. So with that in mind, it could be detrimental to us to continue working with her in such an intimate fashion. And what I mean by that is, as our auditor, her firm is going to have access to all of our information, all of our data, all of our records, and that could be something, if it becomes beneficial to her as a co-defendant, to use against us, or to her benefit, which could indirectly or directly work against us. And I think we need to have that in mind and keep our interest at heart and do what's best for us. And so that in and of itself is also a reason that I would make this motion outside of anything else. The final, there's a lot of other reasons, but also it's an opportunity for us to heal as a district. There's no question where you come from or what side of the issue that you're on, and for no fault of their own necessarily, either better or worse, JAG has contributed to some level of division in our district and in our community. And no matter where you started on that side or how you felt about it originally, I believe that as we sit here today, it presents us with a very good opportunity to clean the slate, move forward with a fresh start. And I think that's very important. So that's my comments for now.
Do I
Thank
have
you.
any other comments on this side? Do I have any comments on this side? Do you have comment?
I mean, I would just maybe caution, given the things that came out in the audit, I wouldn't necessarily say there's a side, but there's truth. And so, given the situation that we're in, I just wonder if it's maybe the best idea to start over on a clean slate. I understand where you're coming from with that, but that's just my 2 cents on it.
Ms. Huddle?
First of all, I need Dr. Harris's breathing exercises right now. I think the world needs to know that Mr. Scully's largest campaign contribution came from one of the subjects of the audit. He also brings up that we and the auditor were both sued. Well, we were both sued by Dr. Hefner, whose daughter also contributed to Mr. Scully's campaign. I think him bringing this up is totally and completely unwarranted. The board has not been provided with any credible reason to consider terminating this contract. following the first audit in decades at D5 that found significant procurement issues, trying to terminate that same auditor without cause makes absolutely no sense. It looks political and it looks retaliatory because a former superintendent decided to sue us both. The board is aware of a confidential matter related to the audit, and trying to terminate this same auditor without cause at this time is curious at best. And tonight, we're going to discuss a budget, an operating budget, and we're going to hear a request to increase our millage. And some board members want to terminate the contract of the first auditor in years that found significant material procurement issues that cost this district millions of dollars. I think that this is terrible for our taxpayers, and I don't know how anyone can look in the face of our taxpayers and say we should consider a millage rate, but we want to throw the auditor out that found operating expense problems.
Okay, I'm going to kind of jump on, I'm going to be very limited in my comments, but I do think that one good thing that has happened out of these audits is that we have found policy issues and some errors in the last several years that we have been able to correct with policies. I also think that it is very important that our administration and that our district can work with an auditor, especially as we move forward. There are some things, as Ms. Huddle has just referenced, that are confidential, so I'm going to be limited in what I say, but I don't believe that the millage conversation relates to the auditor conversation as we move forward in our discussions tonight. Is there any other? Seeing none, I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor of Mr. Scully's motion? All opposed to Mr. Scully's motion? All right, Mr. Scully's motion carries 5-7. Do I have any other items on executive session? Seeing none, that moves us to the item 13, the first reading approval of fiscal year 2023-2024 general fund budget and 2023-2024 capital fund budget. Do I have a motion for the first reading? Mr. Hogan.
Make the motion that the Board of Trustees approves the first reading of fiscal year 2023-2024 general fund budget in the amount of $232,018,415 with an increase of millage of 19.9 mils. This will bring the operating millage of the district to 266 mils.
Do I have a second? All right, Mr. Scully seconded. I am going to, for the record, because there was some conversation prior to going into general session about the timeline of approving the budget. So this is our first reading. If the first reading carries after the presentation, then on the May 22nd meeting, that'll be a discussion meeting or a discussion on that discussion agenda, and the second and final reading of that budget will happen on our June 12th meeting. I just wanted to make sure that that was out there because I know that there were some questions about that conversation. So, Dr. Ross, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Before I turn it over to our CFO, Ms. Paul, I do want to share why we propose we're giving two options here and asking for the latter. We have an opportunity when looking at this budget to typically we look for our needs for next year and try to meet those. But one thing that we know for certain is that the ESSER funds that we have enjoyed for so long will sunset September 30th, 2024. That last tranche of funds was about $15 million for School District 5. As we talked about mental health, a large portion of those funds are to learning loss, to mental health counselors, and have offset air quality issues in our district. We also have, even though we have an increase of revenue from the state that we're projecting as the budget moves back to the House, we know that if we do nothing else, in our district. We keep our budget, our services the same. It will cost us an additional, we estimate, $5.1 million to do the same. Our costs are going up. And we do not look to increase millage lightly, but our fiduciary responsibilities are to the district first. As a superintendent, I need to look to our responsibilities of taking care of our needs in our district. The last large item that we have is we did a salary study. The governor signaled his intent to move the minimum state salaries for teachers to $50,000, and we applaud that. We just know that also in our budgeting for this, we have currently 1,413 teachers. It is not accurate to make the assumption that we get $2,500 for all 1,413 teachers. We get it by a proportionate share of the larger pot. But also our concern is that for each dollar of increase to the teacher salary, there's between 35 to 42 cents that we pay in fringe. Everything from retirement, health care, insurance, and such. It's averaging about 39 to 40 cents per dollar that we have. That does not come from the state. So as we, in this budget, we're asking that we know these things are going to happen. We have the ability for look back by law, I think, and you'll hear, to go up to 46 meals. And we're asking for less than half of that, 19.9 or 20 meals, 19.9 to be exact, so that we can cover these items and cover these issues that we know we will have, that we can sustain the teacher raises that they so much deserve. And so we wanted to be fair and consistent. We did not come up with a number of the salary study on our own. We did a salary study, and we would like to fully incorporate that and sustain that. But I do worry about when the sunset of ESSER happens, and which will be next year, all funds expended on that September 30th, 2024 date. How do we roll back those services? So this will allow us to continue those great services for not only just next year, but the year after. So with that, I'll ask our CFO, Ms. Paul, to come and share how we calculated these numbers. And we're going to provide in here, and we appreciate the motion, but you will see how draft one has the just kind of looking out for protecting next year, but we don't think that sustains our growth. And then draft two is our recommendation. So Ms. Paul.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Ross. Thank you for inviting me here tonight to present to you the first reading of the fiscal year 2024 general fund budget, as well as the fiscal year 2024 capital fund budget. So I want to start with a brief timeline. This is something that we went over at our last meeting. So just quickly, in January, the governor did submit his executive budget. In February, in March, on March 15th, the House released their budget in record timing. In April, the Senate released their budget. But as of this morning, when I followed up with the General Assembly, they have not at this time issued a completed budget. So on May 11th, that is in only a few days, they will have signed die. So if they do not have a signed die resolution, then we would be in a continuing resolution situation. But we are hopeful that they will either pass the signed die or get a budget pass within the next few days. So again, as we went over at the last budget discussion, the state considered several items. The first is the funded step increase for teachers. And that moved the minimum teacher salary for a bachelor's degree with 0 years of experience to $42,500. They also increased the retirement contribution by 1%. Again, if y'all recall, this should be the last year of the 1% increase from the state level. To my knowledge, they have not discussed continuing this, so we do hope that this is the last year. On the health insurance side, they have recommended a 3.7% increase to the employer health insurance premium, and that would be as of January 1st, 2024. At this time, they are not recommending an increase for employees. And the last big item is the bus driver salary increase. As we talked about at the last board meeting, that is roughly 25% to the state minimum bus driver salary schedule. From the district standpoint, again, we talked about a lot of these at our last meeting, but as Dr. Ross mentioned, it costs us roughly $5.1 million just to stay the same. I know at the last meeting we had some questions about the HVAC contract, and we did look more into that and found that what we really think is it's more potential long-term savings. So what we have found is that the old contract only looked at HVAC units that were 10 years and newer, and which roughly was about 400 units that they were working on. This new contract truly touches every single HVAC in the district, which is about 3,700 units. So they've been working to identify any issues and working on more preventative maintenance. So prior to this contract, it was definitely a deferred maintenance situation and trying to respond when there was an issue. So we're trying to get ahead of that, and we do expect, are hopeful that we will end up having some long-term savings if we change our philosophy to more of a preventative maintenance scenario. And then lastly, just our additional considerations, as Dr. Ross mentioned, we do recommend implementing the salary study implementation. So with all of our fringe benefits, that would be roughly $9.6 million. Then we also have some new special education positions, the boots on the ground positions, and then administrative assistant principals at all elementary schools. So that would be 3 additional AAPs. So the total additional considerations are $11.8 million. So you'll see the projected general fund revenue. This is our best case scenario from our last meeting. And again, at this time, we think this is our most likely scenario. So if you compare the difference between the budget as approved or as amended and approved for this current year, the difference is roughly $12.4 million. And from that, the majority of the increase is at the state level. As mentioned, in the previous slide, some of that is from what they call a roll-up. So it's funds, it's not necessarily new money, it's just money that used to be in a separate fund is now rolled up into the general fund. So the offset of that is the expenditures are now in the general fund. So we do have a portion of that increase at the state level is because of that roll-up, but the other portion is because of additional allocation that we do expect from the state level. So looking at an expenditure, this from an expenditure standpoint, as always, we are required to adopt a balanced budget each fiscal year before June 30th. So as of right now, the projected expenditures with all of the items that were included previously, the projected expenditures are $230 million, $488,678. So this exceeds our revenues by approximately $4.4 million. At our last meeting, there was also some discussion about our fund balance and what that policy looks like and where we are in comparison to that policy. So that board policy is DFAB. It has information about the board, about the fund balance and the needs. But something that was interesting to me is it states fund balance should not be used for recurring budget needs. So that's always been, a concern of mine that when we use fund balance for something that is ongoing, that is a runtime source, that will only be a long-term issue going forward. And then as mentioned at the last meeting, the fund balance, the general fund balance generally ranges from 15 to 18% of the budgeted expenditures. And I do just want to talk about this from where we kind of are right now. So our unassigned fund balance as of June 30, 2022, which is our last year that was audited, was roughly $38.5 million. Compared to our 2023 budgeted expenditures, that is right in line with our policy, so at 17.99%. But as you can see, as we increase our budget, which we know is going to happen every year, that percentage of the budgeted revenues goes down. So even an increase of 7.85, which is what we project for the next budget year, that drops our percentage by over 1 percentage point. And then if we just do a 5% increase the following year, then again, another roughly 1%. So if we're not adding anything to fund balance each year, we could be out of compliant in only a few years. So I do want to touch on more of the kind of year two expenditures that Dr. Ross mentioned. So as he said, ESSER does sunset September 30th, 2024. And just so y'all can kind of understand the magnitude of this, between ESSER 1, 2, and 3, the district received over $23 million. Some of this was used for one-time expenditures. I think that the district did a really good job of trying to do some capital improvements, so that whether that was HVAC, whether that was air quality, things like that, so that that would not necessarily be an ongoing expense. But there are certainly some ongoing expenses that are ESSER funded at this time. So from a personnel standpoint, I do have several of the positions that are funded through ESSER currently. And I know, Dr. Harris's team has talked to y'all in length about these positions and the importance of them. And additionally, we have some software items. So Dreambox Math, I know, again, Ms. Miller's team has talked to y'all about how that has impacted students in our district. And then the Care Solace support, which is another software for mental health. And then, of course, we have miscellaneous other things that we have used or items that we have paid for through ESSER funding, whether that's early childhood events, Parents' Night Out, tutoring, summer planning, all of that has been heavily funded by ESSER. So, again, any of these things could be scaled up or down depending on the funding, but it's certainly something to keep in mind as we get closer and closer to September 30th, 2024. So again, this is the same slide that we saw at our budget discussion in April. So if we look at just the current year, currently our operating millage rate is 246.1 mils. Our cap based on the CPI and population growth for next year would be 24.34 mils, which again is really unheard of in recent years just due to that CPI increase. And then if we look back the past 3 years, which we can do that to the code section as listed, that would be an additional 25.57 mils for a total allowable millage increase of almost 50 mils. So looking at this from a dollar value perspective, we did want to show each of the different levels. So if we went, if we used all of our allowable millage increase at 49.91 mils, that would be a revenue of almost $14.8 million. And would cost a taxpayer that has 6% property valued at $150,000, roughly $450 a year. Again, 4% owner-occupied primary residents do not pay school operating taxes. So again, I do want to just touch on some of the dates that we have coming up. So today is, of course, our first reading of the 2023-24 budget. As I mentioned earlier, May 11th will be sign die, and of course, we do hope that there will be a signed resolution prior to that. May 22nd, we had planned to do second reading, but we have decided that that would be discussion instead. So we will still, at that time, I would like to bring line item detail, salary schedules, course fees, all of that. So it'll be a much more detailed version of the budget for y'all to, of course, discuss and ask any questions. And then our third and final reading would be on June 12th with the public hearing held prior to the board vote. Per state law, we do have to advertise that public hearing at least 15 days prior to the date of the public hearing. So we will make sure we get that in the state newspaper on time. And then lastly, hopefully by June, we will have a signed budget by the governor. So as Dr. Ross mentioned, we do have, two budget proposals when we look at this from the general fund standpoint. The first one would just cover the current year and the current year deficit of roughly $4.4 million. So on this side, the millage increase would need to be 14.7 mils to cover that, which is about 29% of our allowable use. And again, just to kind of put this back on what does that look like to our taxpayers, for an increase for a business valued at $150,000, that would be an increase of about $132 per year. And as Ms. Huddle mentioned before, our owner-occupied taxpayers do still pay operating millage on their vehicles. So if the vehicle is valued at $30,000, that would be approximately $26 per year. Our second budget proposal does include not only the increase for the current year, it also includes the increase that would cover next year's ESSER sunset. So what we have here is total expenditures and revenue of $232,018,415. This would use about 40% of our allowable millage use. And again, we do have some cost estimates, so an increase for a business valued at $150,000 would be $179 per year, and the increase for a vehicle valued at $30,000 would be approximately $36 per year. And I do have included in here, since we do expect our expenditures to be roughly $230.5 million, what would we use that extra money for in the upcoming fiscal year? And I think Dr. Ross does have some ideas on ways to spend that.
I want to go back, if you don't mind, one more slide. I just want to make upcoming dates to remember, if you can go back. Just want to make a programming note. May 22nd will not be a reading. That will be a discussion, and at that time, pending approval of the motion or whatever approves tonight, that's when we will bring back that new adopted teacher salary and as well as all supplemental details. And then June 12th will be second and final reading, FY 23-24 budget. So I just wanted to, I know we said that loud, I just want to put that with the slide. And then we talked about what we would do. If you're watching the news, you know that we're in a teacher shortage, and there are a lot of incentive packages out. I'm not necessarily in favor of the signing bonuses. And while that is something you see, I think for someone who's new, that's really great. And we have the NARI program. But someone who's been with our organization, 5, 10, 15 years, they wouldn't receive anything unless they left and came back. So I'm really in favor of, if this motion passes, to bring forward for discussion and a retention incentive package for next year. And that would affect every employee in the district who maintains with us throughout the year. And again, there is a lot of, we know that as the state minimums move up, we're seeing we want to keep that competitive edge that we've always enjoyed in School District 5. And so we present this budget that allows us to maintain that for our teachers, staff, and administrators.
And I do want to just go to the next slide since it's under the same heading. We do also have presented before you the FY 23-24 capital fund budget. So included in board policy DB, we do need to have two readings of both the operating and capital budget. If y'all recall, at the last meeting, we did approve bond proceeds. We approved a bond to issue through SCAGO, and then y'all also approved the $15 million worth of annual maintenance projects, but we didn't really put it all together in the form of a budget. So what I have before you is just $25 million on the revenue from bond proceeds, and then I also have the expenditures, $10 million for Irma High School expansion, and $15 million for our annual maintenance projects, again, that were approved at the last meeting. So again, a balanced budget of $25 million on both revenue and expenditures.
Do we have any questions?
Just clarity real quick. With the capital fund budget at $25 million, do you need an amendment to that motion to vote on that as well, or do we need a second motion for that one? I didn't include that in the original.
Yeah, I'm not sure, I
Why
know
don't
we
do a
would
second
need, we would
motion when we're
need
done
need
talking
two
about the,
motions, yeah.
when we're done talking about the general
Two
fund.
motions
Two
would be
motions,
clean
yeah.
for us. for the
We have a
record.
motion on the table right now, so let's talk about that and then we'll come back.
Okay.
Mr. Satterfield.
Yeah, I had a couple quick questions. The first one is, I know you talked briefly about the ESSER funds and trying to stay up to par with some of the money that we're using from that. How much of those ESSER funds are now considered reoccurring fund or programs that would be considered reoccurring?
Well, I think what we have outlined here is definitely the personnel piece. So we would assume that that would be reoccurring. Now, again, as always, we did issue, when these people were hired on with the district, I believe, and Dr. Turner, please correct me if I'm wrong, but they did receive contracts with an end date. So they knew that they were temporarily grant funded. Is that correct, Dr.? So they did know that. So again, that is completely up to y'all if y'all decide to continue that. But again, just because it's personnel, that would be considered an ongoing. And then also have some software items. So, certainly not the 23 million that we've gotten. Again, I think we did a really good job, especially, the first tranche was $1.7 million. That was used almost exclusively to pay bus drivers while the schools were closed in 2020.
And that sunsets when?
September 30th of 2024. So there's a piece that sunsets September 30th of 2023, so only in a few months. But the 15 million that he referenced does sunset on September 30th of 2024
Okay,
So can I
another
ask-
question.
Mr. Satterfield, can I just ask a
Oh, yes, go
piggyback
ahead.
question to that? Why would that be included in this then?
I'm sorry.
Fund? So September, I'm trying to get my calendar right, so.
Right, so we've said the sunset is the September 30th every date, but that's really the preceding year in which we're actually making those expenditures. So it needs to be offline by then, but that's summer work where those monies are being spent, and then that money really should be gone by that preceding year.
Now I'm thinking about your question. Another question I had was, with the fund balance, I noticed that you said if there are no changes, it would decrease slightly. What percentage of that, do we exhaust that fund balance, or do we come close to exhausting that every year?
No, so our unassigned fund balance is not used for any purpose unless the board decides to use it for a specific purpose. So it is there for, emergency use,
I
rainy day
understand, it's like a
fund.
savings account, I
It's-
understand that. So, but each year, we don't find these legal expenses or these other, out of the left field expenses, so to speak, that we're using that for. It's pretty consistent, pretty stable.
Yes, it is pretty stable. So we have found over the past few years that we have been able to add a little bit to fund balance each year due to or no, not necessarily teachers all the time, but just vacancies in general. So we do budget at 100% fill rate, and we know that that's just unrealistic. So we do end up having a little bit of cushion that we're able to add, but we don't actually budget to add anything to fund balance each year. It's just kind of one of those things that happens.
All right, my third and final question is, on your dates, you said June, the governor signs the budget.
Yes, sir.
June,
He just has to sign it before June 30th.
he just has to sign before June 30. Is there, is there a pretty good understanding of exactly what's going to happen prior to that? So if we pass a budget on June the 22nd or whatever, are we pretty safe?
I would say so at this time. So basically what my understanding is the holdup, it's not necessarily a funding issue. It's not that school districts are going to receive less funding or the House and the Senate can't agree on funding. It's actually a staffing issue with the Comptroller General's office. So that's kind of what the holdup is right now. But the expectation is not that the funding would change for public school districts.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Ms. Huddle?
I have an amendment. I move that we amend the motion to state that we approve first reading of the operating fund budget with no increase in the millage rate.
Do I have a second? Ms. Barnhart? Any discussion?
Can I speak to the motion?
Yes, ma'am.
Everything, what millage is it's a tax rate. It's just like your income tax rate on your personal income. And in fact, I would say that the things that are taxed with the millage rate actually increase probably more over time than your salary does. So millage on a house, millage on a second home, millage on a boat or car or a business, the values of those properties go up over time. And so without increasing the millage, the tax revenue also goes up over time. I think it's bad, it would be one thing if we were in some type of crisis, but we're not. I think it's bad to raise millage when you're not in a crisis because it's not fair to the taxpayers. You're increasing it, and if you look at the history of our millage rates, they almost never go down. I looked at the last 10 years, and it went down once, and that was 2 years ago. Also, and the final numbers may be different, but I don't know about Richland County. Lexington County is getting ready to raise their millage as well. $20 on a home, $30 on a $100,000 home, and hardly anybody has a $100,000 home anymore. So, $20 on a home per $100,000, $30 on non-resident per $100,000, and if we just did the minimum of ours, the $44 that was proposed, and someone has 2 cars, you're talking about and they have a $400,000 house, which is not unheard of. In our county, you're talking about a $172 increase. We have to do better. We have to learn to live within our means. Benefits are going to go up. Things are going to happen. It's actually not really accurate that if salary goes up, benefits go up 35 to 42%, because a big chunk of that is actually health insurance. And health insurance costs us the same no matter what the employee's salary is. So I just think that we need to not jump to a millage increase. I'm also disturbed, quite frankly, by the ESSER stuff. We were told, we asked over and over again, how's this going to work? If we approved all this other ESSER funding, is it going to be made permanent? And then how are we going to deal with it? And I felt as a board member that we were reassured that that would not happen, that we would make sure that those funds were spent on things that wouldn't require recurring budget expenses. So for those reasons, I think that we need to limit or do not increase the operating millage.
So we have an amendment on the table. Do we have any further discussion on that, Mr. Scully?
Yeah, I don't agree with that, unfortunately. I mean, this is not a fun conversation to have, but the fact is we have to, in order to stay competitive, we have to continue and constantly invest. The minute we stop investing in our schools and our community, we start falling behind. I don't agree that, first of all, just clarification, Dr. Ross, houses are not included. We don't receive revenue from millage on houses, correct?
That's correct. On 4% properties, we do not. It's 6% properties.
And for
And 10%.
automobiles and personal property, that often actually decreases over time. It depreciates. Those are depreciative assets. So they don't increase. So those values are actually going down. So it's unfortunate. I don't know that nobody likes to have tax or have to pay taxes, but in order to continue to keep up and provide the benefit, and Dr. Ross, what I'm going to ask is in future discussions, or perhaps now if you have the information or time, talk about, because I think outside of the numbers, and you brought this up earlier, so the why. What's the why behind this? And yeah, we can look at a spreadsheet and see the red number as the why. Well, it's negative. But what's the why? What is the impact? What's the return on investment for us to increase and invest in our teachers to make their salaries be competitive? What's the return on investment to our community when we have a robust, well-functioning, efficient school system? We can sharpen our pencils and cut the budget year over year as we need to, but costs never stay static. They are always increasing. We always must invest. Had we not decreased the millage, and number one, it's not wise to ever cut your revenue. So I don't think a decrease in millage, there's a reason why you don't typically see decreases in millage, because people don't cut your own revenue off. So we have to continue to invest. It's not fun, but we do get a return on that investment, and that's what moves this community and our school system forward.
Do I have any other comments regarding this? Mr. Hogan?
Ms. Paul or Dr. Ross, I guess, with millage staying the same, I guess it put us at like a $4.1 million shortfall?
Roughly 4.4.
$4.4 million shortfall? Where would that money, I mean, I guess we have general fund. Is that what the thought track is?
Yeah, so if we did not increase millage, we would be in a deficit of about 4.6 million?
4.4.
4.4 million.
Yes, sir.
And at that point, it would be, we're already sharpening the pencils. I do want to say that, you know, I think when we look at our millage rate history, and I'm just talking about the rate, I'm not talking about the amount brought in, but at the rate, 2017, we were at 256 mills. We're at 240.
246.1.
246.1 operating. So we have to roll back where we're at less of the tax rate for that. We spent a lot. Let's just, you know, let's take ESSER off the table. Let's say we cut all those positions. We still have our teachers that we're trying to stay competitive with. I did not come up with the $2,500 raise minimum. That was not District 5's decision. That was a state decision. Our teachers deserve that then. If this whole state is doing that, forget ESSER. Let's pay those teachers that $2,500 in this district. I look at District 5 as pre-Act 88, pre-Act 388, and post-Act 388. Pre-Act 388, we had money from every subdivision in this community. Every person who lived in this community was providing a teacher, a nurse, a support staff, a custodian. They were providing that. When they opened that subdivision up, they were contributing. Now they're not. Now it's on our businesses. And we've pushed to shop local. We've pushed at all unrestricted cash that we could send that back to our locals because we know that they were developing us. And now all we ask is that in this rate, as our teachers are moving, as they're moving that minimum up, that we're able to stay and keep that competitive advantage. I live in this community. It's on me to contribute as well. And I think I have kids in this system. I want to be able to compete with our neighbors. And I want my kids to have that for their teachers. And so the question was asked, why is the millage increase? Why would we ask for this? We're losing ground against inflation every year, staying still. This is an effort in order, and I think we're going to sharpen our saw. We're looking for positions. We're not hiring, we're not replacing all the positions we're losing. We're sharpening that pencil to keep as many of those FTEs tight. But I don't see how we fund this salary study without a millage increase.
I'd like to kind of address some of the comments. First of all, a decrease and an increase is not a cut. That's federal government talk right there. And I'm not suggesting that we don't increase the teacher salaries. I'm suggesting that we go back and sharpen our pencil more. There are places to cut. And it's a misnomer to say that property inflation includes property values. In fact, I would say in these two counties, property values are probably increasing more than general inflation. A cost of an automobile does go up. According to the NADA, currently an average car is $30,000. It was $20,000 a year ago. So yes, that truck or car depreciates, but when you go to buy a new one, when it quits working, you're paying $30,000 instead of $20,000, and now your property taxes have jumped up. And as Mr. Scully said, I don't ever want to see a tax decrease. So everyone needs to understand that that's the mentality that's gone on in this board for a long time. And if we approve a millage increase, our taxpayers need to know it's probably never going to go down. In fact, it'll just keep going up. So my motion is to get the administration to go back and look at how can we give our teachers our raises, and sharpen our pencil. I'd even say this board should take a pay cut. I'll stand in line. I'll cut my pay to 0. But let's get in line. Let's not soak our taxpayers at a time when they're also going to get an increase from at least Lexington County.
Does anyone else have any comments? So my thoughts on this are, I mean, I understand what Ms. Huddle is saying regarding the ESSER funding, because we did have those conversations as we were adding folks about what that looks like for our general fund and moving forward, and once that sunset, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I was like, when does it, that 924, is that going to impact this year's budget or not? And I agree. I mean, Lexington County they're discussing a millage increase as well, and it is much needed. I understand that as well. I mean, inflation is a real thing right now. Everything is more expensive. The cost of living is more expensive. I'm concerned about I don't want to raise taxes. I mean, you know, that impacts my family, and our cars aren't worth $30,000. I mean, I don't want to raise taxes. I mean, I understand that, but my concern is whether or not we can pay our teachers. And so when we talk about like going in with a pencil and like fine tuning every single thing, I mean, Ms. Paul, has that been done? I mean, what can be cut? How do we, I mean, I've talked to other school districts in Lexington County, and I feel like everybody's talking about raising millage because of the fact that the General Assembly is talking about increasing teacher pay. It gives me heartburn. I understand that, but what I don't want to do is, because it sounds good that we're not raising taxes, and I don't mean that in like a glib manner. I'm genuinely trying to have this discussion because I don't want to raise taxes. I think the ESSER comment, that is very valid. But that's only a very small portion of all of this. So, I mean, can we implement the salary study without raising millage at all? And if not, like, is there somewhere
I'll
else where
answer
we
that.
can cut? I'm not,
I don't want to put you in that decision, but you can back me up if the numbers are wrong. We estimate the salary study, and the reason we wanted to do it is to be fair, to find a third-party approach on that. The salary study to be $9.6 million. We feel like we're up 12 million, so you would think, hey, they're up 12, it costs 9, they have money to do it. The reality is, just to hold what we currently have, we're down 5.1 million. So we're short on that anyway. Now, I want to share this about the pencil. 90% of our operating funds is going to people. So when we sharpen it, that's what we're cutting. Now, I can go back and cut it, but we talk about services, we talk about deliverables, internal controls, that's what I'm cutting. To make this work, the textbook is 85-15. 85% in your salary and fringe, 15% your supplies. We had a meeting with our Lexington counterparts, right? We have some districts in Lexington where the value of a meal is $25,000. Ours is in operational about $311,000 for a meal. So I have some partners some superintendents, they can raise 3 meals, they can't hire a teacher. And so the state says we're going to do an index of taxpaying ability. We're going to help those districts out because of their index. But the districts like D5 and our counterparts across the lake, that's not coming for us. So, we can't have this conversation in a vacuum. That's before Act 388, and that's where we are now. And with this formula, this is the second year it's ever existed in the state of South Carolina, an index of taxpaying ability. And I'm telling you, as a superintendent, we have 2 changing variables that are impacting our operating budget. With that, 36% of our operating budget has been local. We lean heavy on the state to help us. These conditions cause me pause, and I wanted to have some assurity on the local side. I don't know what that number is if we don't do an increase. Our minimum increase was 14 mills. So we can go back and do that, but I can't cut any more supplies. So talk to a teacher. They'll tell you the assistance they need. If they say they don't need any assistance, that's not what's come to me. But I got this pencil sharpened to a point right now, and I need some help.
So, Mr. Satterfield, just real quick, because you had asked a question about the budget, the second and final reading being in June, and why that was, or, you know. So I'm looking at board policy, and one of the reasons why we're trying, well, we need to get the budget passed by June 30th is because is it July 1, I believe we have to have any millage number given to the auditors in both counties, Richland and Lexington County. So everybody in the world may have known that, but I just wanted to make sure that I've said that's why that July or June 12th board meeting is important for the second and final reading. And I'm going to come to you, but I do have a question, Ms. Huddle, because your motion's on the floor. I mean, what would you cut
Well, first of all,
based on
I would
the
take
90?
another look at, first of all, absolutely not teachers' salaries. I would increase the teacher salaries as much as the state is in the steps. I would not do that. I would look at, we had a salary study. We got one board meeting on it, and yay, we have a salary study. But one thing that was not known to me, which I mentioned last time, is I always thought, like last year or whatever, when we did a 3.5% or whatever, I thought, well, that's what everybody got. But what I didn't realize is there's a step too. So just because you were in your seat for another year, you also got another 2.5% or so. So I think we ought to look at that. I mean, y'all, and I know I'm probably going to get hate mail. Look at our district calendar. Look at the number of holidays. Nowhere in private business do people get that many holidays. We don't have massive turnover in administration. And I'm not suggesting we cut people ever, but openings happen. And, I've worked for businesses that went through tough times. We had to lay people off. I am not suggesting that, okay? But we are relying, the entity that this is going to hit the hardest is the small businessman or woman. You can have and none of us on this board except Ms. Barnhart are a small business person, but she may tell you retail space is expensive. You're talking $500,000 or more just for a small business. And those people are going to be hit the hardest with this. And we live in a place where it's not that hard for people to move. I mean, look at Chapin. They can easily move to Newberry. It's not that far away. So I just think that we have to dig deep. If Dr. Ross it comes back, we have another reading on this. If Dr. Ross comes back with a detailed budget, which we have not seen yet, and says, here's where I can cut, here's where I can't, my opinion may change. But as of right now, I'm looking at this like a person that has to manage my own budget for my own family, and you don't get the luxury of just saying I want more money. And I don't think we should do that with our taxpayers until we have turned over every rock.
Mr. Satterfield.
I'm not sure I want to speak now. I understand exactly what Ms. Huddle is saying, and being a retiree on a fixed budget, I don't want my taxes to go up either. But I will tell you that we are literally between a rock and a hard place. We really are as a district, and most districts are. Last week, or maybe a week and a half ago, I met with some board members from other districts, and I was listening to what they were going through and some of their issues. And bottom line was they were talking about doing some things that were going to cost our district a lot more money. One district was offering $5,000 a year for 5 consecutive years, bonuses for teachers. They were looking at childcare and housing for teachers. When we meet and look at our teachers and how many teachers that we have that are returning, retirees that are returning on letters of agreement, it's enormous. It's something I've expressed concern over and worry, I guess, because of the numbers that we have. So we are definitely between a rock and a hard place, and I understand both sides. You know, inflation is just killing everybody. The cost of everything. The cost of operating this school or our schools has gone up, and I know that Ms. Paul is quite aware of that. You know, electricity, everything, and it's not going down. It's not like it's going to get less. It's not going to get cheaper. But I can tell you the heart of our schools is our teachers. And if we don't do our best to compensate teachers and make sure that we're getting the very best, then everything else is just going to, you know, not go well for us. So, again, I understand everybody's position on this. If we approve the motion, the first motion, does that mean that Dr. Ross cannot come back and talk to us, or, you know, can we ask him to go back and still approve the motion? And because it's just the first reading, correct?
Right, so we can, at the second and final reading on June 12th, we can go back and amend that number. Right now, there's an amendment for no millage, and then, so if the amendment passes, then we go and vote on that original motion, which would mean no millage increase. If that amendment fails, then we'll go back and approve the original motion. And then if say the original motion on the table passes, when we come back on June 12th, if we have more information that would impact that millage number, we could change it at that time because we've given notice and we'll have enough time for the feedback.
And that will give public the opportunity to come and express any concerns. And,
yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You know, I would just, the thing about this is, you know, we're all in it. You said rock and a hard place. We're all in a rock and a hard place because we have the General Assembly that comes in and they can say that they've raised teacher salaries and they're helping education. You know, county council is always put in a bad position because, you know, their budget is so much less than a school district's budget, and we have 5 school districts. I mean, you know, there's... my point is, like, I understand where county council is, so I'm not, you know, I get it where they're coming from because they have a lot of needs, but we also have a lot of needs. And without knowing, like, how that, if we're not gonna, I will say, I disagree on the steps. Like, I think that to even have the conversation to get rid of the step system, which is in every school district in the state, that's going to take longer than the June conversation. I don't know
I'm not proposing, first of all, I think for teachers it's fine. All I'm saying is, and it was ignorance on my part, I had no idea that outside of the teachers and related positions that we had steps, and it meant that the salary increases were actually higher than I thought they were.
Right.
Let me just throw one thing in. Just so you know, Ms. Huddle, we do have those steps, but some of them are like $200 a year. I mean, it's not like there's major steps. If you come in with a bachelor's degree in your first year, your second year, you might get $200 more. So they're not all that
And again,
big.
I'm not questioning the teacher steps. I didn't realize that we had steps in other positions, that you're an administrative assistant, just because you've been there a year longer, your salary goes up. That is, I don't believe it happens in state government. I haven't seen it in my own work. So that was just surprising to me. Personally, I would like to redo that, but I'm not suggesting that at
Before
the moment.
July, I don't
realize
even
that's a
know how
big
that
deal.
would happen.
I'm just saying it was surprising that, you know, we passed salary increases, and I thought that meant each person got, you know, 3.5% raise or whatever it was. In reality, according to the salary study, I believe there's 2 to 3% between steps for things like, I think that's what they said. But anyway, I was just making the point, there are ways to potentially fine-tune things. Sometimes things don't need to increase as much as you think they do, you know. And I'm also used to, people have probably heard the terminology zero-based budgeting. Usually, an organization does not go in and say, no, governments do, but we spent, $200 million last year, and so we're going to try to spend $225 million this year. They actually budget from zero. I need these people, they do this job, and that kind of thing. And so I'm essentially asking that we try that. Say no millage increase. Show the taxpayers that we are going to try. And we may not succeed, but I think we should try.
Well, I'm going to call, okay, Mr. Scully, and then I'll have one comment, and then I'll call for the vote.
Yeah. I'm also, what I'm not hearing is a reason to vote for the amendment, because there is no, voting for that amendment, our superintendent is asking for help. We need help. So there is no reason, we're going to have another reading. There's no reason tonight to vote for that amendment. We can vote that no and move on with our discussion. If it just, let's help our district. He's asking for help to do his job. And so that's my comment.
And I just want to say, I mean, because I just don't know where you were cutting, and because we're talking about the people that are in our buildings every day, and this is, I mean, I have major concerns if we don't give them these, they've earned these increases. I have concerns about that. But what I would say to Ms. Paul and to Dr. Ross, before we come back for discussion at our next meeting, if this motion does not pass, I would just ask that if there are places to cut, and there is a way to not, to limit how we raise millage, or if we have to, please, I know that we'll have the itemized budget and we'll be able to see it with ourselves, but please help us with that. Like I said, nobody likes raising taxes. This is it's a difficult, I don't think there's anything perfect to say on either side of this, but I'm going to call for the question. There's an amendment on the, hold on, Mr. Hogan, last minute comment.
Just for clarification, if millage isn't increased,
We're at a deficit.
we have a deficit. The path of that deficit is our general fund, correct?
Like dipping into our general fund balance?
Correct.
Yes, that could be an option.
Okay.
That's not accurate. Yeah.
You don't have a deficit. The path is to try to decrease the budget, and as much as you can. Yes, if you decrease your budget and your millage doesn't cover it, then you have to dip. But I'm not proposing that. We had $1 million proposal for a program. There's money there. We need to just tighten up.
Well, on that question about the fund balance, you could include in your budget a transfer from fund balance that would be assigning the fund balance to cover that deficit. So that is technically an option. We do have a board policy that says you shouldn't use it for recurring, but we could try to allocate it for non-recurring. So either one would be an option.
All right, I'm going to call for the question. All in favor of Ms. Huddle's motion? Yeah.
I made the motion that we amend the approval of the first reading approval of the general fund budget to limit the millage rate to the existing millage rate.
Where there's no increase. So all in favor of Ms. Huddle's motion? All opposed? All right, so Ms. Huddle's amendment did not carry. So now the original motion is on the floor that Mr. Hogan made. Mr. Hogan, do you have that? Hold on. Does anybody need Mr. Hogan to read his motion back? All right, so I'm going to call the original motion on the floor. All in favor of Mr. Hogan's motion? All opposed? And Ms., are you opposed or in favor? The original motion on the floor? Yep. You're in favor? All right, so that motion carries 6-1. And Ms. Paul and Dr. Ross, I would hope that there is some, I mean, I know this is a tough conversation.
No, we want to thank the board. I know tough conversations are tough to have, and we're not here that we all agree with everything. We're here to do the best thing for our community and our students, so we recognize that. I am passionate about the process that we've taken to get us thus far, but we're going to have more of that discussion on items that we have cut. I think that's important to show. So I don't want to say that we haven't sharpened our pencils. I think we're kind of feeling that now. I do, though, hope that we look at our why first. A lot of discussions we get past that, but understand what to run a classroom today, the mental health issues that we're dealing with. To keep teachers in that classroom, they need supports. And I'm going to advocate for that. I want to be as fiscally conservative as possible, but I'm always driven by my why, and I've never wavered on that. That's how I'm going to bring back that discussion. So I don't want to leave this topic thinking that I'm going to slash how and what without first making sure that I'm comfortable with the why. With that, I would entertain a motion for the debt service.
Mr. Hogan.
I'd like to make a motion that the board approves the fiscal year 2023-2024 capital fund budget for $25 million.
Do I have a second? Mr. Scully, any discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor? And that motion carries 7-0. And that moves us to our next item on the agenda, which is the item 14, which is the first reading approval of proposed revisions to Board Policy JQ, student fees, fines, and charges, Exhibit E. Do I have a motion? Yes.
I'd like to make a move that the board approves the first reading of proposed revisions to Board Policy JQ, student fees, fines, and charges shown in Exhibit E.
Do I have a second? Mr. Scully and Dr. Ross, Ms. Paul?
Yes, Ms. Paul would like to speak to our first reading of this policy.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Ross. I do just want to make y'all aware, we did have a very, very small change to the wording. If y'all notice from discussion to now, we did add in the language who are eligible to receive free lunches, or in the last sentence, the district will prorate instructional fees for students who are eligible to receive reduced price lunches. So in consultation with our attorney, we decided that we should add who are eligible into the policy. So that is the only change from discussion.
All right. Do we have any questions or discussion about that? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor of the first reading? That motion carries 7-0, and then that brings us to our robust discussion agenda. Do I have a motion for number 15? Mr. Scully.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second? Mr. Hogan. Do I have any discussion? Seeing none, we are adjourned right before 10 o'clock. Vote. No! Oh, I messed it up. All right. All in favor? 7-0. We still made it to motion carries 7-0. Sorry, guys. It's late.